Okay, so welcome everybody. Good morning, and welcome to the 11th edition of the Space Generation Congress. My name is Andrea Jaime, for those who don't know me yet. I'm an aerospace engineer and now the executive director of the organization of SGAC and also the Congress manager. So we have been working very hard for the last 12 months to make it happen. So I have to thank to our sponsors and to all the team I had behind me and the chairs, the SGAC organizing staff, because we did all a great job. Thank you very much. But actually, now it's your time to make it happen. You're here, coming from all over the world. So first thing, I have to thank you all for being here, for coming from 45 different countries. It's also, I think, a record for this year. It's amazing. It's really impressive. We have about 40% girls, 60% boys, which is also impressive, between 18 and 35 years old. So yeah, welcome to be here, and I have to thank you all for being here today. I see faces that I already know, which is great to meet annually, if not more times per year. You know, the space sector is small and we see each other many times. But I'm very happy to see new faces, because this is a sign of the wellness of the organization. That's good that you are coming here for the first time, and I'm sure this will not be the last one. So I'm really excited to meet you all during these three coming days. So now, as I said, it's time for you to work to make it happen, but also to have fun and to enjoy it. We are the young generation of the space sector. We are the new coming leaders, and we want our voices to be heard. So welcome everybody to the Space Generation Congress. Let me introduce also our chairs of the organization. So we have Nwosa from Nigeria and Doldirina from Georgia. So they will also address you with some small words, welcoming words.
Hi everyone. Like she said, just very few words. I'm not too excited about the old regular SGC faces. I'm more excited about the new faces. I mean, it's interesting to have new faces every time. I keep telling the old guys, when are you guys leaving? Make space, make way for new ones. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Italy. Welcome to SGC. So learn a lot, socialize, and have lots of fun. Thank you.
Surely learn a lot, and you will have tons of new information about your working group and in general with regard to all the topics that the Congress will cover. And it's going to be very exciting for you to brainstorm on the issues, and I hope that you are kind of prepared for this already. And to cut the long story short, I would like right now to introduce our first speaker, and this is the Society Working Group session highlight speaker, who is Dr. Michael Simpson. He is the Executive Director of the Secure World Foundation, our long-standing supporter and organization who really aids SGAC a lot, also with sharing the wisdom and knowledge with us, with you. And Dr. Simpson is a very engaging speaker, and I'm sure that he will give you food for thought, not just for one day, but surely for the 3 days of the Congress and maybe beyond.
Welcome to what will be an extraordinary period of time. A period of time where you will begin to practice something that you will master if you're going to succeed in this business. And that is learning something new almost every day of your life, applying it to some new kind of problem, recognizing that it will relate from one job to the next, from one sector to the next, from one society to the next. When we think about the role that space is playing in human society, it is extraordinary to think that we are talking about a razor-thin slice of human history that is just about 50 years old. Of course, when Sputnik first went into orbit, there was a social effect. There was an effect in Russia of understanding that there was real reason to be proud in a resurgent economic capability of a country that had once been considered very backward. In the United States, there was a sense that a certain amount of hubris in its own technological prowess had now been challenged. And that challenge, working through the impact of society in education and in industry and in government, led to this extraordinary competition from which, frankly, we all benefit. That was the 1960s in space. But the 1960s, on a human scale, really is yesterday. And what we sometimes forget as we begin to look at the relationship between space and society is that we are looking at something extraordinarily modern. So modern that all the differences we might want to find in our ages, me a bit over 60, you quite some distance from 60, are utterly immaterial. Because in fact, they represent over half of the total history we're talking about. And we've shared it. We've shared a period of time in which development infrastructure around the world was exclusively terrestrial, changing into an environment in which development infrastructure is increasingly supported by space assets. In many parts of the world that were falling further and further behind in various kinds of divides that we could have called telecommunications divides, digital divides, differences in capability relative to the processing of data, the sharing of information, the coordination of activity, have narrowed, actually, because of space activity. There are parts of the world that we justifiably still understand as being terribly poor, that nonetheless have access to communications that is more capable than the communications that any major leader of a developed power had available to him or her just 20 years ago. And those are in cell phone networks. Now, of course, those of us that think carefully about the technologies here love to point out that cell phone communication isn't satellite communication. And yet, so deep is the impact of space on society that I challenge you to understand that cell phone technology depends on space technology. Not because of communications capabilities, but because cell phone towers need to be synchronized. And the easiest way to synchronize them in most of the world is to synchronize them using satellites for timing services. Navigational satellites, but providing this extraordinary timing function. Because if you were to get your cell phone towers out of sync in many of these developing environments, the communications breakthroughs of the last 15 years would go away within 24 hours. And within 48 hours, you would have extreme difficulty in keeping in sync the cell phone tower networks. I use that as an example because what we need to understand when we think about space and society is that space capabilities and social behavior are becoming extraordinarily intertwined. In much of the world, financial transactions are time-stamped to within thousandths of a second because of the capability of getting timing that is that accurate from satellites. And this is something that can be done over most of the planet. Whereas the old atomic clock high-frequency transmissions were not nearly as available in the southern hemisphere as they were in the northern hemisphere, and were far more susceptible to disruption by weather than our satellite technologies. So think first of all, when you think about space and society, that space and society can really be seen across a continuum of time that has a history, that has an extraordinary present, and has a rapidly advancing future. The history we need to understand in terms of this narrowness, the fact that the first real Earth observation satellites were creatures of the early 1960s, literally 50 years ago. That we saw telecommunications begin during the 60s and now blossom into the largest of the space industries. We have increasingly seen navigation and timing capabilities from space become widely accepted and widely adopted around the world. We have seen disasters mitigated, and in some cases dramatically mitigated, because of our capacity to use weather satellites and, in fact, even topographical satellites using interferometry to measure the potential for risk from both weather-borne disasters and ocean-borne, and to some extent even river-borne disasters. What you will look at in your sessions during this Congress in terms of the modern impact of space on society will be an extraordinary insight into a field that space is really just beginning to impact. And that is humanitarian relief. And the reason why this has been slow to develop is because it requires an integration across the entire range of our technologies. Finding ways to ensure that human settlements are not placed where they are most likely to be damaged by a flooding or by severe and regular predictable weather, to be perhaps better served by hygiene services and better served by availability of communications and social services. You'll see within the understanding of humanitarian relief this notion that we can pinpoint human movement. We can pinpoint the way in which communities are developing, expanding, contracting, and from that understand some of the underlying political, social, economic dynamics that are taking place. The images, for example, of the Great Lakes states in Africa, when you take a look at this extraordinary expanse of land in places like Chad and Mali, where you see just within the era of space-based imaging, the extent to which these Great Lakes have shrunk in size, you understand immediately that you have a tool to measure what the potential impact is going forward and in the present of humanitarian relief. When you start to look beyond that, when you start to look beyond the current moment, you get to one of the most exciting places that your careers are going to take you. Because you're going to have to take this emerging sense that all of these space assets that we have created can have even greater power if they're synergized, if they are brought together, if we can somehow make use of the data simultaneously. And you're going to have to find solutions to challenges that we perhaps allowed to emerge because the engineering problems of making every one of our technologies speak clearly one to the other were beyond the current economic need or perhaps even intention of the times. To that extent, I have this extraordinary image of a group of students from the International Space University in 2005 presenting the fruit of a summer study they had done on using space assets to deal with wildfire, a problem that, of course, plagues much of the world, and now that I live in Colorado, it seems to have captured more of my attention than it used to. But their presentation was really quite intriguing for two reasons. One, they had done a kind of what-if analysis where they took 4 or 5 different kinds of data from weather satellites, from radar satellites, from optical imaging, from infrared imaging, and they had gone through a manual recoding of a large part of that data to show what capability would exist if all of those data sets were calibrated so that they could be used together. So powerful was the presentation, as it showed the ability to look at a fire site, understand its hydrography, its exact topography, the navigational challenges that were presented within it, the weather patterns that had occurred over the last 7 days and could be expected over the next 7 days. So powerful were the presentations that there were seasoned firefighters in the presentation who wept that this couldn't be done on a regular basis. And of course, why can't it be done? It can't be done because we have not yet gotten to the point where we have developed the calibration capabilities that we can just grab data from various sensors, throw it together, and have a coherent picture. Well, that's good news in a way. It's good news because nobody in the world wants to be at the early stage of their career thinking that all the really tough problems have been solved. And I can stand here in absolute confidence and tell you that a very large number of very tough problems are left as you try to apply space-based technologies to the real needs of a society that is becoming more and more aware that space holds data, but not necessarily information. Your challenge is to provide the information. Your challenge is to make sense of the data. And your challenge is to recognize that as hard as that is, you need to have an extraordinary commitment to want to make it happen. In my early days, younger even than most of you in this room, I graduated from a school where the tradition was that each student provide a quotation that they thought reflected some of what they were, some of what they anticipated being, and it was an interesting exercise. You had to go through the past looking for an idea that you wanted to take with you into the future. And the quotation I selected was from a famous American jurist. At one point, he was the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, a person who was a remarkable analyst of the American Bill of Rights. His name was Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. And the quotation was, "Through our great good fortune, in our youth, our hearts were touched with fire." Everyone in this room is here because your heart's been touched with fire. Because there's something that is an extraordinary passion deep within you to not only use space technology, but to push forward its frontiers. And you'll hear from the speaker following me extraordinary opportunities to do that beyond planet Earth. And every one of those, to some extent, will also be a manifestation of society. We are, after all, a searching people, a curious people, a species that loves to find questions and seek answers. But there are also extraordinary challenges in applying every new thing we learn to solve problems here on planet Earth. Just as going to Mars becomes an act of using space technology to see beyond where we are, missions to planet Earth are similarly filled with opportunities to find new ideas, new applications, new opportunities. And so as you look at space and society, what I want you to do is to understand that you're looking at a very special subset of a very large universe of possibilities. But very special because it is here on planet Earth where we live, where for the foreseeable future most of our species will live, and where, as best we know, we harbor the only examples of complex life, at least in our solar system. For that reason, you will have opportunities to do things with space assets on this planet that you will have nowhere else. But that leaves me to deal with one caution before we leave the field of space and society. And that is try to avoid one of the deepest stumbling blocks, the deepest stumbling pits that the generations before you have created. And that is this extraordinary and often fairly unseemly competition between those who would apply technology from space to this planet and those who would develop space technology to look beyond this planet. This gulf between society and exploration is about as artificial as any gulf you could imagine. The number of technologies that are being applied today to solve extraordinary problems that we have discovered by looking beyond ourselves are enormous. We explore because we want perspective. That perspective helps us see ourselves better, but it also helps us see our place in an extraordinarily wondrous universe better. We are at home on planet Earth, but we are also at home in this universe because Earth is at home in this universe. There does not have to be a gulf between exploration and society. If you are really interested in devoting your career to humanitarian relief, to disaster mitigation, to communications, to basic technological application to planet Earth, absolutely do not overlook the discoveries that your colleagues will be making somewhere. That your colleagues will be making beyond planet Earth. And as your colleagues seek to look beyond planet Earth, be open in sharing the technologies you've developed to study this planet better. Because as you do that, you will start the process of repairing, perhaps, the damage that has been done between those who argue for science, those who argue for applications, those who argue for exploration. You are at a point where you can understand that space can have a community within the sector. That it can understand its differences, but that those differences can also be extraordinarily damaging when they're taken to a point of conflict between what you want to do most with your career and what some other very smart person working with similar technologies wants to do with theirs. So use the sessions here to learn. Use the networking time to build relationships that can transcend these gulfs of science and application and exploration. And recognize that however young you feel, you now have a past. You now have a past. You have, for the most part, begun your careers. There are people who still would love to be where you are, who are preparing to begin their careers. Who will, if I can understand my experience with your generation, who will almost certainly shortly be telling you that no, you just don't have it right. It should be done this way. And when that happens, recognize that you have as much reason to be happy about that as I do. Because together, we have shared most of the most amazing beginning in human history. The beginning of the real space age. And we may be together sharing the beginning of the next space age, which is not only one in which human society broadly benefits from space technology, but where space technology enables human society to become a multi-planet species. That could happen in your lifetime. I look forward to sharing the beginning of that process. And if I don't make it to the point where you can look back and say, yeah, we actually live on more than one celestial body, just remember, I said it was going to happen. Those predictions are always best when you don't have to have them tested until people can only remember that, yes, I think he said it. So, all the best. Keep your focus on this relationship between society and the whole human experience of space, and recognize that the problems, for the most part, are problems of integration of ideas into solutions for real problems. There is no such thing as a single technology that is the miracle technology anymore. Your future is going to be a future of working together. So, a social future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Luke. Well, very interesting to know that in the future, people will look to satellites to explain social behavior. I really look forward to that period. Excuse me? Sorry. You might have questions for Luke concerning the subject matter. So now would be a good time to put up your hand and ask those questions if you have any. Pop one side. Anybody?
Oh, here we go.
Definitely.
Well, the question is, for such a complex activity as, say, humanitarian relief, which is a cycle in itself, and it involves cooperation of people of really various professions, how to overcome the challenge of understanding each other when you need to understand each other in very, very short period of time and be efficient, because things can get damaged and the damage might not be recovered. It is not really maybe a technological issue, but more an issue of understanding each other's ideas and messages while you're doing something.
I think what we're going to see in terms of this need to have cross-cultural understanding is that a lot of activity in the area of humanitarian relief in particular is going to start off in relatively narrow contexts that are experimental. Many of you are probably aware that an extraordinary volume of data that's been generated over the last 20 years from space assets is slowly beginning to be either declassified or released or made more available than it was in the days when it was first captured. A lot of that data includes topographical kinds of data that can play enormous roles in planning to avoid problems of humanitarian displacement, for example, but also to make choices about the placement of people in ways that match certain cultural preferences, in ways that match the needs of rapidly creating a community with adequate hygiene, in terms of making sure that you don't simply take advantage of a nice, wide, flat space of land that happens to flood every 50 years. Not exactly your best location for a relief center or a refugee center. But these will happen in smaller contexts. I think what you'll see is that we'll develop some real test cases. And in the nature of the human spirit, then people will say, well, how come you're not doing that in my backyard? And so there will be an incentive from both sides, because unless there's an incentive from all the sides that are involved in that kind of communication to find resolution, it's very difficult if it looks like it's being imposed by a single party. And so I think we'll proceed by demonstration cases that show this works. As it works and it is shown to be effective, you'll find more and more states, organizations, humanitarian associations asking to participate. And I think inevitably, as you try to demonstrate the capabilities of this technology, the easiest approach is going to be to show how it works. And an example of that might well be the way we've used satellite data in disaster mitigation. Early on, there was all sorts of resistance to sharing data because it would reveal the capability of the sensors. It's the classic intelligence operatives concern. Now there's pretty widespread agreements through the Charter, through SPIDER, through a number of bilateral agreements to share data that can help to see the extent of damage after a disaster. Moving to this next step of seeing whether or not we can relieve humanitarian suffering without there having been a single point focused dramatic disaster, that's the next issue. And it is a social issue. It's an application of a technology issue. Other questions?
People from the society group, you have another chance to ask you.
All right.
Okay.
In the absence of further questions, Mike, on behalf of the Space Generation Advisory Council, I'd like to present you this token.
Oh, look at this. Well, this token may not last.